Hello, I'm Joe Riley, and this is the Inheritance Podcast. We have a special treat today, an interview I conducted live with Jay Hughes at the recent Southeastern Family Office Forum, or SEFOF, in Atlanta. SEFOF is a remarkable nonprofit family office and family enterprise network that is now 14 years old. I had a wonderful time there and met many nice folks. My thanks to Brian Hughes, Bryn Monahan, and Betsy Brown, and all the volunteers for making this keynote and the excellent conference possible. The interview was conducted over a live stream in front of an audience of 300, and I do want to address some minor audio issues you might notice. While there might be a few slight fluctuations in sound quality, rest assured these issues are not significant and should not detract from your listening experience. Jay Hughes is an author, advisor to families, and founder of a law partnership in New York that represented private clients throughout the world, and is now retired from the active practice of wealth. His wonderful book, Family Wealth, Keeping It in the Family, has become a classic in the family wealth space, and he notes that the shirtsleeves proverb is a warning and not a curse. Jay's wisdom is on full display in this engaging interview, and it is readily apparent why this man has had such a large impact on many families and individuals over the last 30 years. Please enjoy my wonderful conversation with Jay Hughes. Hello, Jay. Thrilled to see you again, my friend.
Great to see you, Joe, and to be among this group today. It's been a year, as we said, in the preparation, and it's a remarkable, wonderful thing to finally be among all of you and share some ideas and some experiences, and as I've said to so many over the years, walk along a little while and tell each other our stories.
Jay, I'd like to start today with something I think doesn't get covered enough, and that is spiritual capital. And I think it's fundamental to your thinking, and I'd like you to describe what you think the core of spiritual capital is.
Joe, what a great place to start. Pinky up, as we say. Some years ago, Joe, as you and I have discussed in other forums, after 30 years of competing to try to find a better word than wealth to define what I thought a family was, I went to the dictionary and I discovered that the word wealth is an Anglo-Saxon two words. So it's been in our language since, I would say, the 4th or 5th century AD. The word wealth derives from two Anglo-Saxon words, wealth. You can hear as you say it. And it has only meant one thing throughout all of our history, being. Wealth actually means well-being, nothing else. In modern life, we have taken that word and we have used it in a very limited context to define something called financial capital. That is not wealth. That's financial capital. Wealth is well-being. So that is the spiritual question of family. Are we consciously, continuously, with great passion, seeking to achieve the well-being of each other, of our community, and of our society? This is noble work. Spiritual things are noble things. Another way, Joe, I say we might look at this is that what is our common aspiration? Aspiration, ad spiritu in the Latin, to spirit. Aspiration. I would say our common aspiration is that our families flourish. What we don't remember is that another spiritual aspect of aspiration is, as the great philosopher Aristotle said, you cannot have a flourishing society if the families that make it up are not flourishing themselves. Of course, that's true. So I think, Joe, that spiritual capital begins with aspiration to spirit, and that aspiration is that our families will flourish and in turn be parts of a flourishing society. The other thing that's interesting about spiritual capital is that if you aspire to something, it might inspire you, right, Joe? In spiritu, the Latin again. We might be inspired by that aspiration. And then, of course, Joe, to get anything worthwhile done, you have to have perspiration. Otherwise, nothing's going to get done. So you aspire, you inspire, you perspire, you might get something done. And I would say the great question of spiritual capital is, are we bringing well-being, the meaning of wealth, into our families, into our societies. That's a spiritual journey.
The first time I saw you speak, so over 20 years ago, you used to do an exercise that I think would be really great for this group. You used to start with a meditation. Would you like to do that?
I'd love to do that. May I ask you each, in the hurried time of day that we are in, and the busy time you've already been in, if you'd each sit back in your chairs, just sit back, close your eyes, and take 3 easy breaths. Just relax. And say, oh, God, that feels good. And now as you're back in your chairs and you're breathing easily, just easily with your eyes closed, I'd like you to imagine yourself into the place on the earth where you are supremely happy, your place. Imagine yourself there, the smells, the sounds, the beauty of that place, your place, where you go when you're supremely happy. And just rest there. Bring that into your consciousness and let it nurture you. And now as you're resting there in that beautiful place, invite the people that you love the most to come and join you there. Welcome them there. Give them the ability to experience that beauty, those sounds, those smells, that magnificence. And now, as you're gently coming back, as you're breathing and opening your eyes, let me remind you, this is your wealth. This is your wealth. This place, these people, this community. This is your wealth. And I would ask you also, Joe, in the spirit of our many conversations, I'd ask each of you, as we continue this conversation, if your mind wanders, and it will, of course it will, go back to that place and rest there, and then rejoin us, because you can't go there often enough. And with those people that you loved so much, this is your wealth.
How can we give gifts of love and understand the qualitative capitals in our lives?
Let me ask each of you, as we speak of the qualitative lives and gifts of love, I'm going to ask you each to raise your right hand with your thumb pointing down. Come on, you can all do this. I can see. This is not a hard thing to do. Okay. Now, I want you to rotate your hand up, keep your thumb up, and close your fingers. This finger is financial capital. Come on, wiggle it. You can do that. And here's the problem. You see, all the qualitative capitals disappeared. So if your family sees itself as financial capital, you're doomed. It's over. The game's gone. Now turn your hand back upside down again. Here are the 4 qualitative capitals: spiritual, social, intellectual, human. Essentially, what Joe is asking is, how do you bring into your spiritual, social, intellectual, and human capitals, the core capitals of your wealth, your well-being? First, each must be infused by actions of love. The heart must be engaged. The head will be engaged. But, Joe, the way I like to illustrate this is that in science, and I'm sure there's some biologists in the room who will agree with what I'm about to say, the heart has more connections to the brain than the brain has to the heart. Of course, the brain has connections, but the heart has more connections with the brain than the other way around, and the heart has all the connections to the gut. So if we look at heart as love, we look at head as thought, the first thing we know is we've got more work to do with heart than with head. Second, if we infuse love, which is spirit, a high spirit being, then we're probably doing work that's going to grow those 4 qualitative capitals, right? We're going to grow them because the energy flowing into them will cause them to grow. What are we talking about? In the spiritual capital we just talked about a moment ago is really our shared purpose. And our shared purpose is to create well-being individually and as a community over a long period of time. So if we're infusing love into purpose being the well-being of each other and of our communities and our societies, we're doing good work. In the social capital, which I'm talking about, not the philanthropy, although it can be included, but social capital for me is how we make decisions together. Because if we are really going to make a journey to reach our fifth generation in good shape and go on from there, then we have to be very conscious that every single decision we make is going to lead to our success or our failure. So we must be very conscientious in our social capital, that is our decision-making process, that we are being discerning, not just deciding, we're being discerning. We're doing work of the heart that asks us to go deeper with the question we're deciding together than we might otherwise go, because we know that every decision is a linked decision toward a successful fifth generation. Joe, the way I illustrate that is from a proverb from the Iroquois, a tribe that has been successful in North America since the 1400s. Remarkable longevity of a human community. When they meet together, many of you may know this, the elder of the tribe, so remember, they're meeting together to make decisions, social capital. The elder of the tribe, man or female, says the following: let us hope that the care and wisdom we bring today to the decisions we are making, our social capital, will be honored 7 generations from today, as we honor those 7 generations ago who made it possible for us to be here today. And by the way, I urge every one of you, when you're dealing with your decision-making systems in your own families or those you serve, to consider asking someone to make that request at the beginning of your meetings. I can promise you, you will make more discerning decisions if you realize that you are in a place because of others who came before you and how deeply you will be raising issues for those who come after you all those years. In intellectual capital, what are we talking about love? We're really talking in intellectual capital about love from the standpoint, I listen to you. I expect to learn from you. And above all, I want to be sure that I know you as a human being so that we can learn together. Joe, again, one of the things that families have done that I've helped over the years, it's a little bit uncertain in the academy today, but isn't it amazing, Joe, that most families don't know how each other learns? It's astonishing. They don't know how each other learns. So when they're learning together, instead of learning together with materials that best respond to how each human being there learns, which is love, caring, deep caring, they don't know how each other learns. So one of the things that I used to do when I was as active as those in our audience is I would have families find out how they learn as a gift of love, a real gift, not a transfer of money, but a gift of love. How, if you know how you learn, you command the classroom for the rest of your life. So this is how love flows at intellectual capital. Human capital is we care about each other and each other's thriving. So Joe, if I could now come back, having gone through the 4 qualitative capitals and the question of love, I'd like to ask the audience to think quietly again. Please go back to that beautiful place that you were, resting there now, and ask yourself this question. This is your Welsh, remember, the people you love, they're with you, and their well-beings. Ask yourself in that beautiful place, are we cultivating a culture of care? I want to say that again. You hear the seas where they dance? Are we cultivating a culture of care? I say this because, Joe, in families, we are all fiduciaries for each other, aren't we? Small f. We are all responsible for each other in a profound way. great families, those that are interested in getting to the fifth generation and going on from there. Remarkably, Joe, all over the world in my travels, they create cultures of care. They take the first duty of fiduciary, small f, that responsibility for each other, and they create a culture of care. Care is love in its practice. If we're going to build a family system about growing the qualitative capitals, which is where our wealth is, our well-being is, supported by the financial capital, it has a job, then we must adopt a culture of care, Joe, as love. And we must apply that culture of care to each of the capitals.
I'm very curious to hear more about your current work. I know you're doing a project with Stacey Allred, who is here, and Mary Duke. And the question you're trying to solve is, can the family live in the plan that they create?
Okay, I'm going to ask again. Everybody sit back in your chair. Please take a couple of deep breaths. Please do that. Go back to that beautiful place where you were with the people you love. And now just let into your head, but into your heart, just what sounds very simple question. Can the family live in the plan? Now I'm going to tell you all, because you've taken your time, which is your treasure, to come here at the invitation of some wonderful people. I'm going to ask you to know something that Stacey and Mary and I, who embarked on this quest, it's a quest really, in COVID, because we were talking with each other one day and just together said, gee, can the family live in their plan? Now, I don't think any of you are going to be surprised to know, and I won't tell you how many, but it's very many, twice two very many's, people we've interviewed about this question. Family members, advisors, academics. You might be shocked, but you probably won't be shocked to know that one person out of those very many has said, yes, the family can live in the plan. I want to say that again. One person out of the very, very many who we have interviewed has said the family can live in the plan. That's a shocking thing, isn't it? What are we talking about? What I'd like you to do is to imagine for the moment sitting in that beautiful place with the people you love, your wealth. You realize together that every plan is a play. It's a play. It has acts. It has roles. It has expectations. And by the way, as many of you may remember from your drama classes in college, if the last act of the play is people standing with good relations, it's a comedy. Not ha-ha, but with good relations. The play resolves the issues they had in a positive way. The real problem of a play, if their body's lying on the stage in the last act, is it's a tragedy. This our Greek forefathers were very clear about. So let's think for a moment. Well, one of the problems of the shirt sleeve proverb, and we're not spending much time on it today, is it suggests that when the matter that is family goes back to being energy, the energy body from which it came, there are likely to be some bodies lying on the stage. It's not very attractive. Don't we want to play where the acts continue even after the family goes home from that particular production of the play in which the family members are standing on the stage with some good discerning decision-making going on there that suggests another play? Here's the problem. As you're all sitting thinking about this, the problem is that the plans are written for a generation of people who are gone, and they're written basically by people who are concerned about taxes and creditor protection. That won't surprise any of you in the room. And by the way, those plans also create structures that are not human structures, they're legal structures that lay people have to live in. Oh, now I see where Mr. Hughes is going. Yeah, and what's it like to be a beneficiary, which is not a human role, it's somebody else's role? What does it mean to live in that role? So the problem that Stacey and Mary and I are going to be writing about, and we have been talking everywhere we can to try to create a conversation around this question so we can learn more and be more responsive as redactors of what we learned from you, is that the people that are going to be in the play, and this is going to bother you a lot, are cast involuntarily in the second and third generation. Just think about it. The plan is made for taxes and creditors and someone's heroic journey. Fine. The problem is that the players of the play, because those people are gone at the end of the first act, are involuntarily in the play, didn't sign up for the play. They weren't cast carefully in the play. They don't know how to speak the lines of trusts and companies and S corporations and philanthropies and all kinds of things for which they've been unprepared. In fact, Joe, as I wrote in with Keith and Susan in the cycle of the gift, every person in a play is a person who has received a meteor from outer space, which they must integrate into their lives. This is the problem of receiving matter from someone else that you didn't create and has nothing to do with you. I'm not going to go there today, but some of you will be thinking about that. And I see what he's saying. You just get a meteor from outer space. One day you're this, and one day you're over there. Now you're in a play again that you are involuntarily in, and that you have to figure out how to be in as you're in the play. You don't get to read the lines. You don't get to study the lines. You just have to live the play. The problem, Joe, of those plays is they create chaos. Now, can the chaos become complexity, or does the chaos cycle down and you have further chaos? This is the problem of living in the plan. And I am not suggesting, I'm not suggesting that the plans were not thought through. What I'm suggesting is that Stacy's and Mary's and my research of, again, twice very many, very thoughtful people, the answer has been no. The family cannot live in the plan. Now, that doesn't mean they're not living in the plan. You can also say, well, they're living in the plan. What are you talking about? I'm talking about living, Joe, spiritually, wealthy, living with well-being, rather than living with a plan that you don't really know how to be in that play. End of this conversation with you, this particular part of it. If you're in the business, in the high sense, no, let me say better, professional practice. This is not a business. If you're in the professional practice of creating plans, would you please, on behalf of the rising generations of the families you're working for, ask yourself, can they live in my play? Because you are the playwrights. You are the playwrights.
Jay, in our last interview, I got a lot of feedback on the line, families that are failing spend all their time on power. How can you pull out of that situation?
I'm going to reach back to a book. I thought maybe today I would get through this joke without citing any books, but I'm afraid that I have to cite this one. A man named Monahan has written a remarkable book on power and love. I'm going to leave the love part of it out because I've already covered it, but you can hold love. And the question of love that he discusses, is it treacly love or is it deep love? But let's touch the power question. Monahan, better than anyone I know, yes, let's say better than anyone I know, has asked this question about power in community. When we exercise power, do we exercise power over or do we exercise power to? Let me say it again. Do we exercise power over or do we exercise power to? Monahan's argument, with which I am completely in agreement, is that any system in which power over is taking place will fail. Whereas the system in which power to, I guess we could call that empowering, if we wanted to use words very carefully, empowering, has a much higher order of likelihood of success. Let me see if I can offer this observation. Very often when we're dealing with power, we're dealing with some kind of leadership question. My view for families, and again, I would ask our wonderful journeyers with us here, Joe, today, to think about this. Do we lead from in front, or do we lead from behind? And which kind of leadership has the most success in families and societies? Interestingly, Joe, to me, and I think maybe some in the audience, believe it or not, that conversation about leading from in front, power over, leading from behind, power to, that Kahane writes about, was a conversation. This is the fascinating thing about ideas. It was a conversation in China in the 5th century BC. Isn't that amazing, all of you? The Chinese in the 5th century BC had two men in a conversation about this question of leadership and power. One of them, who was very famous, is named Confucius, and he argued that the great leader was the one who led from in front. And follow me. The other Chinese gentleman was a man named Lao Tzu, who said, when asked who was the greatest leader, now listen very carefully here, he said, the one whose followers say we did it ourselves. So Confucius said the great leader was the one in front who led from in front. And Lao Tzu said the great leader is the one from behind, essentially, who said the followers did it themselves. But there was a leader. It's not subtle. It's brilliant. Joe, what I would say is families who grow great elders, and who are the great elders? The great elders are the Lao Tzu leaders whose followers say we did it ourselves. This is power to, as opposed to power over. And my experience through this long lifetime has been that great family leaders are those whose followers say we did it ourselves. They're the ones who lead from behind.
Jay, what can we learn from the courtier?
First of all, who is the courtier? I want you all to now imagine yourselves in a medieval castle. You are an advisor to the king or queen. Where do you sleep? If you are the privy counselor, that's the number one counselor. You are the privy counselor. You are the personne de confiance, the person of highest trust. You sleep not in the king or queen's bed, but just below it, because you're the last person standing when the Vikings come. You earn this position, Joe, by your care. You demonstrate the culture of care to the family that you serve by your service and by your experience. So the great work of people like us who serve families, including those of us who are family members who serve families, not simply third parties, is, are we the personne de confiance for that community? Are we its privy counselor? And a story that might illustrate this that I love, and so I'll tell it. Imagine for a moment that you are a young woman in a castle about 100 miles from London. You are in your late teens, and you did not know each day whether you would live or die. You did not know. One day, you were out of that castle where you were captive, essentially, although you could ride out, but you were basically a captive. And the night came, and you saw him riding toward you, and you thought, maybe this is the day I die. I don't know. And the knight gets off the horse and kneels down, puts his head down, and says, Madam Queen. You say, what? Say, yes, you, madam, you are the queen. So now you must live. Your existence has changed. You've had an existential event in your life. Maybe this is your meteor coming in from outer space. And the knight says, by the way, it's now my duty to take you back to London so that you can be coronated and be queen. Okay, so you go to London and you get to London and you have absolutely no idea how to be queen. And an old man whose name is Burleigh, Burgley, his real name, he was Lord Burleigh, but his real name was Robert Cecil, an old man with a beard, receives you. He says, Madam Queen. And you say, who are you? He said, I'm Robert Cecil. I'm Lord Burleigh. I'm the head of your Privy Council. She said, what is that? He said, the wise men of England give your majesty guidance if you seek it. And she looks at him and she said, I don't have any idea how to be queen. And he says, yes, ma'am. You can understand that. May I help you? Not what do you need, by the way. Oh, no, much better question. May I help you? And she says, yes, please, I need help. What's the end of the story, Joe? The end of the story is that when Burleigh dies, some years later, Queen Elizabeth, that's who the story is about, goes to him and holds his hand and says, thank you. That's what it means to be a Privy Councillor. It's the most honored, most important role any of us ever fulfill. And again, Joe, back to fiduciary with small f and a culture of care. Great Privy Councillors are the great fiduciaries, and they, in turn, seek to enable a family, a community they serve to care.
So I've got one more question, and then we'll go to the audience. I think we talked about this in the past. I'm interested in your thoughts on why service is more important than self-interest.
Now, that is a tricky question. Fiduciaries, again, small f, and all the different capacities that we play as advisors, our first duty is care. We've talked about that a couple of times already. Our second great duty, Joe, is loyalty. And loyalty in our work is no self-interest. Loyalty in our work is that we put all other considerations ahead of self. How to do that? This is going to surprise the audience, but it is because we are incredibly selfish, with a big S. Now, wait a minute. How can we be practicing no self-interest because we must put all other interests ahead of ourselves, and yet we're being selfish? Joe, it's because this service work we do is a calling. It's the Latin vocare, it's vocation. It's not an avocation, it's not a job. It's our calling in this lifetime to serve, not to fulfill needs, by the way, but to help. That was a great moment in my life when I could differentiate between fulfilling needs and seeking to help. So one has to be selfish, Joe, in the sense that if one is called to this work, to serve others, that we meet our calling. And in meeting that calling, we are being selfish, aren't we? But with a big S, not a little less. So service in this work of helping families' well-beings, the societies of which those families are members' well-beings, that service responds to the selfishness of us as to what is in our own best interest. And what is our own best interest is what do we learn in this lifetime about ourselves that grows our own consciousnesses. And we grow our consciousnesses, we become ourselves in this work when we are serving another in the context of a fiduciary. Small f, always faithful, ever faithful. Culture of care, duty of loyalty, and then eventually some other duties. The self-interest in this work is because we are called to it. We are called, and those of us called to it must follow that calling because it is being selfish. I hope you'll understand what I mean by selfish in a certain odd way. But I do believe this is ourselves growth and learning in this lifetime comes from this vocation for us. And I can imagine many of you sitting in the room listening are saying, I see what he means. I love what I do. I love the families and societies I serve. Love, Joe, that same word you used. And in doing that, I discover myself. And in that way, I am selfish.
Let's take a couple questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question? Okay, the question is about identity and how we understand ourselves as a part of family in the context of this conference, and we understand ourselves as individuals, and how would you nuance that to find this sweet spot of ourselves in a family context?
What a wonderful question. The difficult thing that we have to do, and I think those of us in Western as opposed to in Eastern, and I'm meaning big parts of the globe, and those in the Western part of the world from which most of us are coming today, know that our job, our great work, is to individuate. And individuation means, to some extent, moving away from the relationships that have nurtured us and deciding who we are. And in that path, going back to our Greek forebears and Roman, the great ideas of the Enlightenment, the Western tradition, we know that we must individuate. The problem with individuation is that we then discover we are different, not unique, but not one of us, of the 8.5 billion of us, is unique, but we are different. And sometimes that differentness requires us to pull away from relationships that we have in our families so individuation, differentiation. I think Jung's great gift to us is that the third stage of an adult life is integration. I think his wisdom that integration is the ultimate test. So my question to family members is, yes, you must discover your identity. You must individuate, and your family must be willing, in right sense, to encourage you to do that, even with the sadness of departure. You must discover your differentness, and then you must integrate. And the question is, can you then integrate that person who you have discovered into the community of rising generation of your family, so that you're not subsumed or overwhelmed by family, but rather that you are a contributing individual within it? That is a very complicated journey. Far too little, in my view, has been spent on the plays, by the way. The play I was talking about before, which should be a play about that story, shouldn't it? Because the strongest family members in their second and third stages of life, the long, older stage of life, is their contribution. How tragic if the process of individuation leads to permanent departure, rather than to continuity and contribution. Isn't that really the integration question? My view is, can the family nurture that identity, that individual piece of spirit that each of you is and are, and hope that in turn you will reintegrate that piece of spirit into the family and contribute to its well-being far into the future?
We have another question. It's Kirby Ross vlog.
How are you?
Jay, it's so good to see you, even though it's on the screen. Jay, I was hoping you could talk to us because we know we're in the largest wealth transfer event in this world's history, right? So all this wealth is transferring from the silent generation and the boomers to the Gen Xers and the millennials and the Gen Z and now the Gen Alphas, right? So talk to us about what you would advise these mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers to think about to do this successfully, and what you would say to the family office advisors, non-family leaders who are trying their best to support this effort, and then that rising gen who's waiting in the wings or has been waiting in the wings patiently and maybe thinks it's never really going to happen. So talk to us about this transition, because I think this is actually weighing on the minds of many people in this room and many people around the world who are in privileged positions today.
First of all, what is being transferred, if it is financial capital only, is a disaster. So if the plans are all about transferring financial capital and nothing else, then the plays will be a disaster, Kirby. Those plays will all be a disaster. The question is, do we have virtues, not values, by the way, virtues, that the elders of our communities will stand up again instead of being beaten down and project those virtues forward as Lao Tzu leaders, that is, leaders from behind. I'm not mixing metaphors. The job, Kirby, is elders reemerging and providing wisdom and discernment to the process of family, just exactly the way the Iroquois illustrated it in 7 generations ago to 7 generations ahead. We are in a time where the elders do not exist, but of course they exist, and they must be brought forward. Instead of competition in families for power, over Joe's great question to me earlier, can the families learn power too? The question that Lao Tzu and China raised, and that I raise again for some of you to consider. The greatest leader is the one whose followers say we did it ourselves. We know how to do this if the elders will stand up and if they will share the wisdom of how the world solved the Great Depression, solved the Cold War. We must look to the solutions that human communities understand. And I would say that the greatest question, Kirby, is, are we prepared in the West to stand for liberal conservatism, which is our tradition, liberal conservatism, in the face of growing the well-being of a family, which is its wealth? And in turn, through growing healthy families, Aristotle said we will have a healthy society. We do know how to do this. Yes, the numbers are enormous, but let me make it very clear, Kirby. The numbers are financial capital. They are not virtues and values. They are not qualitative capital. The question is always and forever, can we integrate the financial capital into our lives and families so we grow our qualitative selves? Each family, one by one, dozens, hundreds, and that is the way human societies have thrived and survived very difficult times. I say it for the 4th time, but we must call on the elders not to look about power over, but to do their fundamental role in society, lead from behind by enabling the followers to do it themselves.
Jay, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I wanted to thank you for joining us today, and thank you for your wonderful insights.
It's been an enormous privilege. Thank you so very much, Joe. Thank you, Brian, and thank each of you for giving your time and your treasure to join me today. And I will now, Joe, push leave. Okay?
Mrs. Jay, you again. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, please share it with your friends and take a minute to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We appreciate it.